Hello everyone. Welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be doing unit testing models using Ruby on Rails. So I'll be showing you some basic features of unit testing models in Ruby on Rails. So let's get started. Let's start with making a Ruby on Rails project. So I'm in my public folder, and to create a new Ruby on Rails project, we have to run Rails new and then whatever your project name is. In this case, it's going to be a project about articles, so let's call it articles. So now it's running its configurations, and it's installing all the required dependencies and folders. This might take about 30 seconds, so let's just be patient here. As you can see, Webpacker is included, and Webpacker is basically a JavaScript bundling feature which bundles all your CSS and JavaScript files, so it's easier to render, and so when you render your projects in the browser, it comes faster and loads faster. So now that our project is created, we'll cd into articles, and this is our basic folder structure. You have the gem file, which is the package manager of Ruby on Rails, which holds all the packages installed and lets you install new packages. We have the README file, which explains the instructions how to run the app. You have a rake file, which you use to run rake commands. You have a Babel file, and Babel is used to convert JavaScript files, JavaScript ES6 code into ES5 code, among other things. And you have the application config folder, which contains all the configurations of the application. And we have the test folder, which we'll need because when we're writing unit tests, we'll be in this folder a lot. We have the database folder, which holds our migrations and SQL 3 database files. And that should be it. And you have our node modules installed via Yarn, and we have our bin folder holding all our bin files. So let's start by creating a model. And what a model is it's basically the structure of an object in which you develop your application. So it's the basic structure upon which everything is built on top of. So in this article application, we'll need articles, right? Because it's based on articles. So we'll create a new model article. And to do this, we'll run Rails generate model article, and now we're going to specify the attributes by saying title string. So this specifies that it'll have a title attribute of type string and a body attribute of type string. So it's the article is going to have a title and a body attributes. So let's run this. Might take about 30 seconds. And this, as you can see, this command created a migration. It created the article model. It created a test, and it created fixtures. So let's start with migrations. So migrations are basically records of database transactions. So it's easier to keep track of how your database changes as your app progresses over time. It's in best practices to use migrations instead of manipulating the database directly, because migrations allow you to roll back changes and go forward changes easily without being confused and lost. So this folder contains the article.rb file, and this is the model file defining the article model object. This is the file that will contain all the unit tests that test this article. And this is a fixture file. And what a fixture is it's basically sample data that will be loaded into the database before an application is tested. So it's easier when a database already contains test data to test it. So that's basically what a fixture does. It populates the database in order so that we can test the model. So I'm just going to open articles on Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's check out the app folder, and inside app we have models. Let's click on article. So here we have an empty model of the article model. Now let's write our first unit test, since that's what this video is on. In the article test file, we have a commented out test, and this test is basically a sanity check, which basically is a test that doesn't necessarily test the application, but tests if the system works, right? So if this test passes, it basically says that everything is working as we expect, so that we can add more tests that actually test the real application. So to run the test, we just type Rails test, and this is important, Rails env test. So what Rails env test does is it specifies an environment for Rails to run the application. So there's three types of environments. There's development, production, and test. When you're doing unit tests, it's recommended to always include the Rails underscore env test command when with your other commands. The Rails env flag, include that with your other commands when you run it, because this lets Rails know that when you run that command, okay, you're actually testing. So it knows to use this testing database instead of the development database or the production database, because as you can see, okay, in the database folder, the database files haven't been created yet, and that's because we're missing an important step here. Before we run test, we need to run, actually, let's run test just to see. Now this should throw an error, and what that error is going to say is that we have to migrate the database first. So if you open up our migrations folder, we can see that this file contains the instructions to create the articles table, but it hasn't been migrated yet. In other words, it's a pending migration. So we have to migrate first to create the table and the database files, then we can test. So to do this, we can run db migrate while specifying the Rails environment via Rails env test. Let's run this. And as you can see, then our articles table has been created. Now notice articles is in pluralized form. This is because Rails always prefers pluralized forms of models instead of singular versions. just because it's easier to manage and maintain and develop in the long run. So now we can run our test command and see if our sanity check passes. So let's do that. Okay, as you can see here, we have one run with one assertion. An assertion is this statement. Whenever you have an assert statement, that counts as one assertion. We have 0 failures and 0 errors. So that means all our tests pass for now. So now let's test saving the article model into the database. Also, on a side note, I want to show you, okay, so in the DB folder, you can now see that the test.sqlite3 file has been created. This is the SQLite3 file that contains all of the records that we put into it. In other words, this is the database. So that this file was created through that migration we did in the previous command. So let's test should save, should not save article instance on empty title and or body. So we're going to test if an article instance which contains an empty title or body is being saved. It shouldn't. In the ideal situation would be that Rails throws an error whenever you have an empty title or body, because we don't want empty records, right? We want articles with a title and a body. So that's what we're doing here. So to do this, we make an article instance and we have to assign it the value of the article model, a new instance of the article model, by saying article.new. So this creates a new instance of the article model and assigns it to the variable article. Now we'll say assert not. So basically assert not is the opposite of assert. It checks for the opposite condition. We want this test to throw an error, whereas in this test we wanted everything to pass. In this test we're actually invoking an error. We're invoking an active record error, and if that error is not present, then we throw the unit test error. And let's say article.save. So what article.save does is it attempts to save the article instance into the database. And over here we can write a message that makes it clear if the test were to fail, why it failed. So let's write why it failed. Article instance is saving with empty title and or body. So this is the reason why this error was thrown. This is helpful because sometimes you don't know why this error was being thrown, but if you specify it beforehand, it's easier to wrap your head around and debug in the future. So let's run this, and let's see how this test goes. Okay, as expected, this test fails. So you can see one failure. So it's saying that article instance is saving with an empty title and or body. So the problem is there's nothing validating the article when it's being saved into the database. So what we have to do is go to our models file and create a validation by typing validate title presence true. So this validates the presence of the article, the title, and validate body presence true. And this validates the presence of the body parameter. So now let's run our test again. Oops, had a small typo. It's supposed to be validate. Let's run it again. And there you go. All our tests pass. And it's passing because these two statements require something to be present in the article and the body parameters. And since they're not present in this scenario, it's throwing the error. We check for that error, we catch that error, and as long as we caught that error, this test passes. And so in that case, all tests pass. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and see you guys next time.